Beals.
Oh no.
Okay, we won't call her Raquila. But normally we have a couple other guests with us who would generally be sitting here.
Where this nice plant is.
Probably more space, but not today. But we have Rachel here with us because really wanted to tap into a little bit of your story. Because today, what we want to talk about is college and faith, and kind of like how these things work together, kind of the journey that that season of life takes you on.
Hmm.
And this is like a really big thing for me, even as I was like thinking about it, because I spent a lot of years doing youth ministry, and like pouring into kids' lives and investing in them, and getting phone calls at 1 o'clock in the morning, and you know all those things, and you invest so much into a young person, and then they go off to college, and you hear these stories of people backsliding and falling off the rails, and those
Hmm.
kind of stories like just tear me up. Like they
Yeah.
just like really, I don't think there's anything that really gets to me as much as that. And now that I'm a young adult pastor, I feel like I'm even more a part of more aware of kind of what happens in that season of life. So
Yeah, and you also see, I feel like, the other people coming out of that
totally,
season
yeah.
too
It's
now.
like the full cycle, and that's the weird part of like leaving the youth ministry with like sending kids off to college,
Yeah.
and now they're graduating, and so like you see the whole cycle of it. It's just a crazy thing. But today it's just me and Rachel here because we want to tap into her story. Rachel, why don't you just share with us like a little bit of the backstory? So like a little bit of like your life leading up to college, kind of what your faith looked like and what your life looked like.
Yeah, so I'm a pastor's kid, and if you didn't know, my
PK for
pastors,
life.
the pastors of the church are my parents. So good stuff. But so I've just kind of always grown up in church since birth. And so, honestly, like your daughter reminds me of how I was. Just always around, or what I imagine I was, since I have no memory past like last week. Um,
Dang.
but um, but yeah, so I just grew up very involved always, and that was just the norm, was to be a part of church, and like Sundays were always like going to church together. That was always what we did on Sundays. And so it was just the norm to grow up like that. And then as I got older, it kind of just never changed. And so I think my main community all throughout like my childhood and then high school years was church people, and like those were where all of my friendships were made. That's where I had like all of my memories, like my best memories. And so, and you were my or my youth pastor. So this is,
True.
and now you're my young
True.
adult pastor.
Full
So this
circle.
is, yeah, full
Full
circle.
circle.
But yeah, so I think just everything about my life growing up was intertwined with faith. Like it was just so normal and almost like a cool thing to be like super involved in the youth ministry. And so I was totally the kid that did like in high school, I was like student leadership, went on all the missions trips and tours and summer camps and winter camps and did all the events and served. And
Don't
I
forget about fine arts either.
and I did fine arts, which if you don't know what that is, we did some interpretive dancing.
We'll just
It's
keep
great.
going. We'll just keep going.
But yeah, so like I loved it. That was just my fondest memories from growing up
You were also
were,
my first secretary that I ever had too. Do you
oh
remember
my
you had the
gosh.
stool and I made you like the name placard?
It was actually just the most
You
janky
were
thing that you
you were pretty
created for
much
me, but
as
I loved
invested
it.
as you could be, yeah.
Yes, I basically lived at the church for periods of my life. But yeah, so that was just the norm, was having my life be intertwined with
Yeah.
faith, and it was just part of my
Yeah,
life.
and that was pretty much all the way through high school. I mean, you were
Yeah.
super connected to the youth ministry all the way through high
Oh,
school.
like till basically till I went to college.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I went on one last trip with our youth ministry the summer before I went to college.
Oh yeah,
So,
that's right.
so literally up until then.
So you graduate, what year did you graduate again?
2014.
2014. Okay, that was just a couple years after I
Go
graduated.
Grizzlies, GP.
Grizzlies. I don't know what sound I just made.
Rawr.
That was, I tried to make a bear sound, and I think I just like hawked a loogie. I don't know what happened there. Um, but so you graduate high school, and then you do the college tour thing. You went and visited a few different
Yeah.
colleges, and you landed at.
UW,
Come
University of
on,
Washington.
let's
Go
go.
Dogs.
Respect.
I bleed purple and gold. Go Huskies.
Can you imagine if you actually did bleed purple and gold?
That would be
Really
concerning.
weird. But so you get registered at UW, and then you join. You did like Rush, right? You
Yeah.
you rushed sororities.
Hmm.
Tell us about that experience. What was that like? That transition from you know graduating high school and then all of a sudden being entrenched in like you were fully in college at that moment, right?
Oh yeah. Um. Yeah. It's kind of funny because I feel like I have a very unique like story and experience because very few people are pastors' kids, and then let alone I think even fewer go from being a pastor's kid to being like full on sorority girl.
Did you meet
So,
Did you meet any other pastors' kids while you were there?
absolutely not.
Oh,
No, not that I can think of at least. But yeah, so I just feel like that. I met a few pastors' kids that were guys rushing, but yeah, so it was definitely like the most shock that I've ever experienced because I mean, just in all reality, I was kind of in a bubble growing up. That's just was the reality because I was it was so normal to be at church and like that was my entire life was revolved around that, which I mentioned. And so it was kind of like this little bubble. And basically, every one of my friends from high school, even though I went to a public school, was also a Christian or had some sort of faith. And so that was just my world. And so when I went and rushed a sorority, the reason why I did that was because, for those of you that don't know, UW is ginormous. And so I just
it's
wanted,
big.
yeah, it's large. And so I just wanted friends and I wanted to make, and this sounds cheesy, but like make this bigger school feel smaller for me. And so, which is, I think, many reasons why, like a main reason why people rush. And so I did that, and it was literally like my bubble was just burst. And it was just such a different environment than I had ever experienced in my entire life. And in many cool ways, but also in many shocking ways. And so the transition was very overwhelming and like, yeah, I feel like overwhelming is the best word because it was just a
What?
shock.
Yeah. What was the thing? Like, do you remember like there being a moment where you were like, or a thing that happened that you were just like, whoa, like this, like where it just like totally hit you, like this is not, you know, uprising youth ministry anymore. Like
Yeah.
this is not my bubble anymore. Was there like a moment or like
Yeah.
something you remember from that?
I think honestly, like the moment that I joined the sorority was when I would say that like my bubble was popped because when I was rushing, like I was still living at home and I would come home every night after rush and it was very exhausting, but it was just like connecting with people, which is what I had done like throughout my entire life by being a pastor's kid, so I felt like I was kind of good at it. But then a unique thing about UW that no other school in the country does is that once you rush a sorority and you get in as a freshman, you move into the house the day that you get accepted. And so most like every other college that has a Greek system, you move into the dorms. So it was very that was when like the bubble burst because I got accepted into the sorority and then 5 minutes later I was moving all of my things in, saying goodbye to my parents, and then they left and I was like, oh, now I live with 60 strangers that I've never talked to except for like one girl that I talked to throughout my rush experience. She was my only friend, but like 50 to 60 strangers essentially, which is terrifying for anyone. Even like me, who's the most extroverted person, it was very scary. And so I think that was the moment that I remember, like, just coming to the realization that, like, whoa, this is not what I'm used to. And yeah, so that was like the big
Yeah.
moment, I think, for me.
What I appreciate about our conversation even before this was that, you recognize so many things that like caught you off guard and you were like, whoa, this is different.
Yeah.
But like not all bad things. Like there was a lot
Mm-hmm.
of like really cool things that you got to experience
Totally.
through that. What were some of like your favorite moments of
Yeah.
just your whole experience in college and being in the
Mm-hmm.
sorority system? Like what was some of like the things that you really enjoyed about it?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. Um, I would say I loved the opportunity to become close to so many people that I would have literally just never met if it weren't for the sorority. Like people that are very different from me, and if it weren't for like this living place, we would have never probably ever met each other at UW. And so and the it's also there's gonna be many things I say that sound very cheesy, but they are true. But like the thing about a sorority is like it's all about like basically becoming best friends with these people as fast as possible, because you move into a place, and I moved in and I was rooming with three strangers, and you either choose to live in this like awkwardness, or you choose to make the most of it and make these people like your best friends immediately. And so all of the things about the sorority were like bonding things and like trips that we would go on, or like events that we had that were all meant to like just make us friends quicker. And so it would make so that we could rely on each other when we were starting school, and like once things got hard academically, which they definitely did at
They
UW.
did.
So that I loved, because I walked out, or I left UW and graduated with so many close friends and like memories that I am so grateful for. Plus, I just love UW because I love Husky football. So that was a huge thing that I got to share
It
with
is a
my
perk. It is a perk
sisters.
for
Yeah.
sure, for sure. So, so you dive into just absolutely new life, right? Like just new experience, new everything. You kind of like pick up and move everything. You weren't totally far away from home by any means. I mean, you could still
Yes.
go home and see your
Mm-hmm.
family and be a part of your church and things like that. But I mean, you are down there, and like if you've ever been down to UW, like it's like its own little city down there. So it's like
Definitely.
you don't really need to leave or leave very often.
No.
Yeah. So, in your time down there, here's this young girl who's grown up in the church, pastor's kid, has this solid foundation of faith growing up. What was the moment where, like, this new life that you were experiencing at UW, surrounded in this new environment, this new culture, when was the moment where there was like tension with kind of like the roots of your faith and how you were raised? And what was that experience like for you?
Yeah. Um, so just to backtrack what you said at the beginning, definitely, even though I was close to home, like I didn't go out of state or anything, my parents' house was maybe a 35-minute drive from school. But it definitely, when you're in it, you like, that's all you want to do. And I didn't want to come home because I was having so much fun. And also, it does feel like kind of its own little like world. And you feel like so far away when you're not. So it's really interesting in that aspect, because I was so close. So it would have been so easy to just come home all the time. But you didn't want to leave because you didn't want to miss things. FOMO is real. But
Especially for an extrovert.
yes, especially for an extrovert. I think so. I mentioned how when I first joined, that was like the bubble popping. That was when I was like, whoa, this is so different than I like ever have experienced before. I think when my faith was really tested, and this is a huge part of my story, but I, as an extrovert and just a human, like I just wanted friends. And it was such a cool thing growing up to be super involved in church and like and that was like my entire community, and like the more involved you were, the like cooler you felt, kind of thing.
More accepted you felt.
exactly. And like the more friends you felt like you were making. Whereas in a sorority at a public university, um, it is basically the exact opposite. Like it was not the popular thing to be a Christian. That's just the reality. And it wasn't very common either in a sorority or the Greek system as a whole. And so it's very intimidating to go from that being like what made you like that being my identity to me feeling like almost a little bit scared to share that because I didn't think I would be accepted. So I think my faith was tested when I was just trying to like make connections with people and make friends because that was honestly just not the way that I felt like I could make friends quickly. I felt like people might think I was this like weird, really religious girl, and so I would just wanted people to like me. So I kind of just followed the crowd for almost right away just so that I could make friends. And not saying that if I were to go back, I would change the way that I did that
Sure. Yeah.
because um, I think it made my entire experience made me who I am
Yeah,
today.
for sure.
But that was definitely when my faith was tested because I could either, here's just an example, I could either go to like this party with my friend, like with all these new friends I was trying to make, or I could stay home by myself and like watch a movie completely alone. Didn't really sound like a way to make friends. So
Yeah.
I didn't want to do that because I just wanted people to like me. And so, yeah, that was when I think just from the get go, my faith was tested because I had never really experienced being around people that didn't, that wasn't the popular or cool thing. And so I think that was when I realized that looking back, my faith was not as strong as I thought it was because my desire to be liked and have friends was stronger than like my desire to follow my own
Yeah.
beliefs, I
Well,
guess.
yeah, I love your. Thanks for just being
Yeah.
vulnerable about that because you say something there that I think is so important to recognize. You could be the most religious, faithful, like sold out Christian, whatever. You could grow up your entire life in the church, but it doesn't remove you from the temptations around you to like jump into that. And I
Yeah.
think that every person, regardless of whether it's a college experience or the workplace or whatever it might be, can relate with that tension of wanting to be accepted and having to kind of like wage this like little back and forth thing that happens between do I engage in this community even though I know it's different than what I'm used to,
Yeah.
or do I just kind of shelter and that puts me in a weird position too?
Yeah. And I think there's an expectation on pastors' kids specifically too.
For sure.
Like there's like the two roads that everybody just thinks pastors' kids will go down. Either you're gonna just never exit the bubble and just be like basically become a pastor one day and like that's your entire life always. Or you're gonna be like the rebel kid that like goes crazy. That's like Preacher's Daughter, the show on TV. Like you're gonna either do that or you're gonna be like
Yeah.
following in your parents'
Yeah.
footsteps. And so that put a lot of pressure on me too.
Yeah.
Like yeah, that's was like a tension as well. Whereas there's also just a middle ground where you're just a regular human. So
Right.
just putting
Yeah.
that out there for all the pastors' kids.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
so I think that was some pressure too to like not fall into like the crazy kid.
Right.
But
Right.
also I didn't want to be a pastor.
Mm.
So
Yeah. Yeah. And you also mentioned that like, you're now, even now where you are now, you're grateful for all the things that kind of happened, the good and the bad, because they really did
totally.
refine you and they shaped you. And
Mhm.
I think it's evident from me, at least knowing you for this long,
Yeah.
that the person that you are today is definitely not just shaped from all the years of being in church, but very much shaped even more and refined. I think your faith
Oh,
has been refined
100%. Yeah.
because of everything you experienced in college too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just a couple more questions for you, Rach. Are there things that you wish you would have known or spent time investing in, before you had left for college? So like thinking back on your days in youth ministry or growing up, even preparing for leaving for college, is there things that you wish you would have known? Think of like a young kid getting ready to go to college. Are there things that you wish you would have known stepping into that season of your life?
Um, I think I wish I would have just, I don't want to say the word warned, but like had somebody who had gone, like rushed a sorority that I had gotten like some real raw advice from, because I think I had talked to some people leading up to it, and it wasn't, it felt like, oh, it's just going to be this like wonderful experience and there will be no trials
Magical.
as a person of faith. So I think I wish I would have known what it was like, just had some sort of like a heads up that, like, hey, by the way, when you go into a sorority, it's not cool to be a Christian. Like, it's just not. You might be one of 3 people in your entire like 120 person sorority that is a Christian. And so, just a warning, like, if you don't go in having some like community already in place for like accountability and like people that you can go to for your faith, you're going to struggle a lot. And if I would have known that and somebody had been straight up about that,
Yeah.
I maybe would have sought out some sort of community prior to going into the sorority, so that
Sure.
I like had a young adult group to be a part of,
Yeah.
or a mentor or something that I didn't have. In my mind, I just thought, oh, I'm going to be just like I was
Yeah.
before, and I'm going to continue going to my parents' church on Sundays. And like as time went on, I went less and less because I wasn't really like, I didn't have that accountability piece besides
Sure.
my parents, which is a different
Right. You're in
kind of
college. They don't know
accountability.
anything, right?
Yeah, totally. Except my parents read right through
Yeah.
me like a
Of course
book.
they do. Of course they do. Well, and I think that's really cool too because your brother's now at UW.
Yeah.
And I remember you guys having tons of conversations and
Hmm.
you like letting him really know what it was going to be like as
Oh,
he
totally.
went into the frat system and all that kind of
Which
stuff.
I totally do now to anybody
Yeah.
who is considering going Greek,
Yeah.
because I want to say I don't want to discourage that at all. I think it was literally some of the most fun that I've ever had in my life. Like, I made some of the best friends that
Yeah.
will like be in my wedding someday. Like, loved my experience and would not take it back.
Yeah.
And if I were to go back, I would do the exact everything the exact same way, because like I said, it's brought me to who I am today. But if I had like somebody just before I went just tell me what I was getting myself
Yeah.
into, I might have done a few things a little bit differently, or I
Yeah.
would have at least been prepared
Yeah.
for it.
For sure.
So,
Because you don't know what you don't know, right? I mean, like going into
totally.
something you have no idea how you're going to react to it, and
Yeah.
having that perspective before is awesome.
Yeah.
So, so would that be that would obviously be something that you would encourage like a senior in high school getting ready to graduate, going to college with? Is there anything else you would just like if you were to sit down with a senior in high school getting ready to graduate? Is there anything else that you would just encourage them with?
Um, yeah, so just bouncing off of what I just said. A, I would just say, um, well, I want to preface again that I don't regret
Yeah,
anything and I would do it all over again.
totally.
And I think it's completely okay to make mistakes, and like not saying that that should be an excuse, because like God's grace is free, but it
Yeah,
shouldn't be taken advantage of.
absolutely. Yeah, that's well
But
said.
I don't feel like, I think for me, I felt like the minute I made one wrong decision, it was like, well, that's just who I am now, so I can just continue to do that because I'm already like just a bad person now, which wasn't true, but I had just convinced myself that the minute I fell into something, I that was just my identity at that point. And so I think it's important to realize that you are going to make mistakes in college, especially because that's your first time being independent and like making your own decisions and being away from your family and like being in a new environment, oftentimes, especially if you go to a public college. So it's okay to make mistakes, but I think it's really important to seek out advice before you go to college from somebody, especially somebody that is going to do a similar thing to you. So if you're planning on rushing, talking to somebody or reaching out to somebody that has been through that, that is also a Christian. If you're planning on going to a private school, even like reaching out to somebody who's been through that before and that you trust and that will be honest with you and have them really share like some real raw things. And also just having things in place for when you do go into your college, like a small group that you're already a part of or
That's
a
good.
young adult ministry, so that you're not just going in and being like, I'll just figure it out when
Yeah,
I get there.
totally.
Easier said than done.
Yeah, that's really good. All right, last question. My guess is that there's probably somebody watching this podcast who's currently in college and maybe is far from their faith, or maybe has a similar story to you, where you grew up in church. You know, you had these deep roots of faith, and maybe they're in a position where they recognize that, man, this was a lot harder on my faith than I thought it was going to be, or they're in a
Mm.
place where they never thought they would be. What would you like if you were just sitting down like this with a person who's in the middle of that? What would you encourage that person with?
Um, I think I would say, I mean, for one, I think you kind of just have to figure it out on your own, to be honest. For me personally, if somebody had sat me down while I was in the middle of probably not making the best decisions and, just having the full on sorority girl college experience, I don't know that I would have really listened. And honestly, it probably would have made me resent the person that told me that and sat me down because I needed to figure it out for myself. And if I hadn't have figured it out for myself and chosen my faith, I don't think I would be where I am right now. So I think there was power in me learning on my own and then choosing my faith for myself, which was the first time that I had actually really done that. Um, so I don't know that anyone would really receive it well to be like, you're making bad decisions and need to find Jesus. But I would say that at the end of the day, whether you realize this now or in a year from now or in a few months or in a few weeks, you're going to eventually realize that God is going to be the only one that will satisfy you. And you can keep searching and searching for things in college that make you feel temporarily satisfied, but in the end, you're going to feel empty and you're going to feel sad and you're going to feel lonely. And that's when you start feeling those things. I just want whoever this is to remember that God will satisfy permanently. And so that's what ultimately brought me back to the Lord and made my faith more real, was just realizing that I can keep filling my things with things that make me feel really good in the moment. But at the end of the day, the only thing that will leave me feeling full and like satisfied and happy, truly happy, is Jesus. And so whether you want to take that advice now and run back to the Lord, or whether you are going to figure that out a little bit later. Either way, I think is fine, because as long as you come back to the Lord, I think it doesn't matter. But yeah.
That's really awesome, Rachel. If we weren't on quarantine, I would give you a straight up hug right now because I'm just really proud of you. Honestly, so proud. And I know your parents are proud of you, your friends are proud of you. And I hope that you watching this, if any part of this, whether you're getting ready to go to college or you're in the middle of it right now, I hope you really take to heart what Rachel just said, because the truth
Mm-hmm.
is that there's going to be a lot of things that tempt you to think that they're the things that will satisfy you or that
Yeah.
will bring you the most joy or the most happiness. And the reality is that is really found in one place.
Yeah.
And just your journey in realizing that and experiencing life and having it refine you and bring you out on the other side, it's just been a really honest privilege to watch you walk
Mm-hmm.
through, and just so proud of your faith and just the way
Mm.
you've handled all that. So want to thank you again for tuning in for another episode of Venture YA podcast. So happy to have you with us, and want to encourage you to join us every Friday at 8 p.m. for our continuation of the Venture YA podcast. I'm Morgan. This is Rachel, and we'll see you next week.